So yeah, thank you for joining. And yeah, as always, the format is that anybody can chime in at any time. Feel free to ask questions, share your thoughts, or interrupt me at any point if you feel that I'm giving any wrong anecdote or interpretation. But I also try to give my own personal interpretation. This is not to quote the author. This is just some of my personal thoughts and opinions. Incentives. Every action you take, every decision made by governments or corporations, every conflict that arises between nations, all are grounded in the intricate dance of competing incentives and strategies known as game theory. Game theory is a mathematical framework that analyzes strategic interactions between rational decision makers. It predicts choices and outcomes based on assumptions about preferences and incentives. So the first paragraph talks about the idea of game theory, that why do we even bother to study this. So this is to study conflicts which arise at our own personal level. We are in conflict with ourselves, which arise in our personal relationships with people around us. It arrives at economic decisions, because whenever we're trying to make an economic decision that whether I should buy this or that, we are trying to understand the trade-offs, if this is worth the risk of putting out my money to make this decision. So it's relevant in all facets of life, and on a very global macro level, it's relevant on how nation states act. So nation states are not a cloud in the air in the cloud entity. It's made of group of people, and those people are incentivized to act very similarly to how we act. So nobody is the enemy in human cooperation or human behavior. It's the dance of incentives which make everything about society, about economics happen. And game theory, so this is the idea of game theory. Why do we even bother to study this? But game theory is also a specific, rigorous scientific study, which is a mathematical framework that analyzes strategic interactions between rational decision makers. So, if any of you have studied Austrian economics, if you remember that Austrian economics puts economics at study in a very scientific way. The only core assumption there is that human action is purposeful behavior, and we define human action as something that creates value, and value is something that is subjective. You are free to define what value means to you. It's uh, it's an internal experience, but when we put our values out into the world and we engage in exchange, we start to create what is called the economy, and this is the market process. And then we go on and building the whole school of thought of Austrian economics. In game theory, what I understand is the basic building block, or the first base layer of studying game theory, is that you assume that humans are rational decision makers. If that is an assumption that is broken, and you can debate whether that is true or not, but for us to even bother to or able to study human behavior, we have to assume that humans are rational decision makers, which in my understanding is somebody who's acting in their self-interest. So somebody who is doing things so that his life is better off. So there is no reason for somebody to self-harm. So any person who is a rational decision maker comes under the purview of studying game theory from a mathematical lens. It predicts choices and outcomes based on assumptions about preferences and incentives. Understanding game theory and its implication will help you comprehend the world around you and why things are the way they are. Incentives and strategies underpin everything from evolutionary biology to the delicate equilibrium of global politics to the ingenious incentive model underpinning Bitcoin. In other words, game theory permeates every facet of our world. So I think I just wanted to share one quick thought on the this sentence on the ingenious incentive model underpinning Bitcoin. So in the debate of what the innovation of Bitcoin is, because every building block that Satoshi used in the white paper comes from some research or insight which was already there. So Satoshi's genius or his insight was not in building a new piece of technology. I mean, it is Bitcoin, but it was putting together all the parts that were already there in an ingenious manner. And it's up to debate on which lens you pick to decide that. Some people say it was the difficulty adjustment, because none of the other attempts at creating a digital cash or creating peer-to-peer money digitally used or had any conception of difficulty adjustment. So one technical argument could be that it was Satoshi's insight was introducing difficulty adjustment so that no amount of energy can ever increase the supply of Bitcoin. But I think from a economics point of view, or maybe the more broader point of view, that how did we make something work without having a central authority, it is the incentive model underpinning Bitcoin. So nobody controls the incentive mechanism of Bitcoin. You are free to decide for your own reasons why you value Bitcoin. So the genius of Satoshi was to put out something in the world which incentivized individuals to put their energy, time, and value and their ethos behind this idea. And that goes into the layers of how it actually works into mathematics, engineering, software. But the economic idea is that individuals are incentivized to work on Bitcoin. There is nothing outside of the individual himself to which makes Bitcoin work. Yep. In other words, game theory permeates every facet of the world. I'll take one pause here in case somebody has any question, something to share. Hey, Aaron, thanks for joining us. A fellow criminal, paper psych said, yes, yes. I think one way I say it is that Bitcoin is just just my personal opinion that Bitcoin is a very masculine thing in the sense that we choose to not trust anybody and we want to verify everything to the teeth of how Bitcoin works. This is the spirit of Bitcoin. That any philosophical ideology, I think, does not come close to what the ideology of Bitcoin is. That you verify everything to the teeth. If something in Bitcoin is not verifiable, then it it uh, it does not. It's not something that will be valuable to Bitcoiners. Yeah, that's just my.
Rian, I was just researching on the game theory and how what are the kind of types of game theory, and I just came to know that these are the kind of regular words used in the Bitcoin community. So one was like cooperative and non-cooperative uh, game theorists, right? So there would be players who would be cooperative with the rules and non-cooperative with the rules. The second was symmetric and asymmetric, which we kind of constantly hear in terms of the kind of gains and kind of how it is being priced, etc. It's a zero sum game or either it's a non zero sum game. Something around those concepts, as well as people who have perfect information and people who have imperfect information. I think there are types of game theory which is being used, and fortunately, like Bitcoin is kind of on the verge having all these applications in some random format, as if people are playing a game between either countries or either between the users of it as well. So it's interesting to see that.
Right. Yeah, I've noticed a lot of people coming into Bitcoin from mathematics, game theory background. I remember when I used to used to look at it from a very naive lens that we all play games all the time. It's like humans eat food and then play games, right? That's like the beauty of life. We do everything after our needs are met, and that's the point of life. So that's the thing that we look forward to. So from my naive lens, I never looked at it as a mathematical thing. I later came to know that it's a study uh, of mathematics, which is done rigorously. So for me, Bitcoin was always a game. I use this to orange pill my mom that I'm just playing a game on my computer. How can anybody ever have a problem with that? So if anybody is creating a problem for that, we clearly need to ask deeper questions. So this is my thesis of why some people when they say that Bitcoin is when they have any problem with people just doing Bitcoin, I just come up with this argument that leave us alone with our laptops and just find something else to bother about.
Nice.
Yeah. Yep, I'll continue reading, but yeah, if somebody has any thoughts in between as well, feel free to share. At its core, game theory is an exploration of strategy. It focuses on how individuals make decisions in situations where the outcome depends not only on their own choices, but also on the choices of others. Game theory explains the dynamics of competition and cooperation in many contexts. The approach most likely to win a competition between actors eventually determines reality. Yeah, a simple example I give is of chess. That chess has very simple laid out rules, and any move that you make in chess is dependent on other person's moves. So with everything else in life, you are free to map out your own decisions. But anything that involves another human, you are forced to take into account their choices, which is a never an easy thing to do because there's no roadmap for predicting human behavior. Everybody is battling uncertainty, and we just make some deductions based out of patterns of human behavior. That's the only shot we have of understanding human behavior. Everything else in the universe has more hard coded laws, so you can get to some conclusion about everything else. But game theory, I think, is this is where for me it took me some time to even understand that how do you even put something like this to study. So chess is a good example that chess, even though it takes into account the other person's moves, it is still a study. So it has a whole school of understanding of different strategies. I haven't gone too deep into it, but from my exploration into chess, I remember that after a point, if you are wanting to be good at chess, you just have to study the game. It's not It's not a matter of just playing more games. There is a rigorous study behind how chess is played. And there's a clip by Kasparov that I think I can share sometime later, maybe, that he goes on to even criticize that how modern day chess is played is that they have derived all fun out of the game because it's become so mechanical of studying the game itself that at this point the creativity aspect of chess itself has come into question, especially because of AI. Because at this point, the best chess player in the world can never be a human; it will always be a computer.
Hey Shreyan, I sent you a link. It's a really cool game that helps you understand the game theory. You should check it out.
Nice, nice. Ncase.me/trust. Okay.
Yeah. So it's like a 20-minute kind of a thing where you jump in, it takes you through the different players in game theory, how they think, how they play the game, and how that impacts the results. So it's a fun little simulation.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I think few of us have also been debating just getting down on Discord together sometimes just to play games. I think we just had one session on the Independence Day, but I think yeah, games is the way to orange pill people. Honestly, I think Zebedee is the only company which does this as a company, and maybe Thunder Games. But I will check this out. Does this have anything to do with Bitcoin, Aaron? Just curious.
It's just some developer that made this little simulation that you can interact with and understand the game theory. So through that, of course, you can apply it to the different players in the game of Bitcoin per se.
Nice, nice, nice.
And one more thing, right? When you talk about game theory, you have to focus on the concept of like Nash equilibrium. I think focusing on that will clear out most of the doubts, even when discussing about Bitcoin. Like, why would people cooperate? Okay, so
Right.
yeah, so like I mean, usually when people I have seen the discussions, what they do, they don't actually think about that Nash equilibrium, and and that is what forces it. That's what like mathematical study, and for to them, Bitcoin seems very fragile because of that. Since they don't understand like the Nash equilibrium, they'll think that okay, Bitcoin can always be taken over.
Right. So, what is the Nash equilibrium in Bitcoin? Is there any high level overview that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, I think someone else talked about cooperative and non-cooperative, right? So in Bitcoin, like we don't assume everyone to cooperate, okay? But the idea is that right now in the current Bitcoin network, let's assume that everyone in the network are cooperating. So that's kind of like that's like let's imagine that's a state. Now everyone are playing some certain strategy, which is like following the rules. Everyone are trying to mine; they are just following the rules. Okay.
Mhm.
If someone like change the state, the idea is that they won't have any excess advantage by doing that. And that particular person, by changing the strategy, the others who are like following that cooperative strategy, okay, their chances of profit also won't go down. If you take the prisoner's dilemma, okay, and let's say that one person is not confessing, okay, and the other person by confessing, he can actually change the outcome like somewhat differently. So like, that's what I mean. What I'm saying is not confessing. It's like not confessing is it's what they want to cooperate. They want to cooperate by not confessing. Okay, I mean obviously strategy is confessed, right? But the one person changing that strategy, they can gain an active advantage. Okay, so in Bitcoin, that is very difficult, and that's what keeps it secure.
Uh, One thing that I think I can ask the group as well. So recently somebody's Safer and Michael Safer it's becoming popular because both of them actually disagreeing with each other a lot. So this is like common criticism of Bitcoin that it's just all of us agreeing on what Bitcoin is and it's going to change the world. That part is actually worth watching because Michael there comes from the looking at Bitcoin as a capital and they didn't come to a cost economics school for money. And both of them were doing a lot of things. But I think one thing that I found interesting was interest rates. So, Safety made the claim that over time interest rates decline. The trajectory is always decline. The interest rate always goes down. It's like the cost of capital is always decreasing. So, as a lender, you are not incentivized to put your capital at risk more and more on a sound money standard. But what has happened historically is that we have never had a sound money standard for a long enough time because something happens. It's like war happens, and we have increased interest rates because now government has to borrow a lot to fund the war. So over time, whenever we have had a sound money standard, gold has been the only money that has come close to helping us make a sound money. Then the interest rate starts to go down. Then something bad happens, and we again have interest rate climb up. So Michael Saylor was criticizing on the fact that just the presumption that interest rates decline perpetually. That's just an assumption that we're making. Because there has to be some equilibrium, right? People will always be incentivized to take risk. They'll always be incentivized to put their capital at work. There is no reason that it's of course it's choice. It's about optionality. Some you can choose to not put your capital at risk. But that does not mean that there's something inherently wrong with wanting to put your capital at work and invest. So there has to be some equilibrium interest that free market. I think this is the empirical reality that we have never had a free market for a long enough time to maybe arrive at that equilibrium. I don't know if this has anything to do with Nash equilibrium, but there will be some equilibrium interest rates. There is no way for us to know currently because we have never had a truly free market.
You are talking on the premise that people are always taking rational decisions and everyone are trying to maximize their profits or everyone are trying to maximize their way of living or something like that.
Right.
I see. This is because controversial because you will get banned everywhere. That is, the wars did not just happen. Okay, some people wanted it to happen. They want to profit out of it. Okay,
right.
So it's not you cannot predict it. It's their decision. They have the complete control. So trying to predict it and trying to make reason of it. That's why I agree with Friedman a lot. Okay, I don't even agree. I don't even consider his talks at all. He just tries to rationalize things with some kind of a mathematical model.
Right.
My claim is that people are doing it intentionally. It doesn't matter. They want to do some harm and they want to profit. They want they have the control, so they'll do. They are not worried about their political power because, in my opinion, everyone are under their control. So that's why I never listened to Friedman. And even Thomas Sowell, initially I was kind of going through this, but after that it kind of doesn't make sense. You cannot predict anything.
But I think the free market principle assumes that nobody will be able to use violence. That's an assumption that we just take for granted. It's the question is arriving at that point that nobody is able to use violence to get in the way of two consenting voluntary individuals getting into an exchange. But that's the assumption.
Yep. Yeah. And that's the assumption, right? Yeah, but see, all these things are bring out. That's okay. When you talk about interest rate, you can mathematically predict the interest rate, how it will behave. That's my question.
Right. I don't know, honestly. Yeah, I think
that's what I disagree. This study, right? This book, the way of study is just agreeing on some. That's okay. As they mentioned, they don't argue like this. They don't argue this logically. They will try to give a narrative to a particular data points. That's what I said.
Fair. I haven't gone too deep into Friedman's work, but what about him justifying monetary inflation as well at some point? But maybe that is a little outside of the overview of this session. Yeah, we can pick this up sometime later as well. Yeah, I'll continue with reading the chapter now. Yeah, this was on game theory, and now praxeology is a different attempt at studying human behavior. So this is a different school of thought or different science altogether to study human behavior. It's very close to Austrian economics in my understanding so far. Praxeology, the science of purposeful human action, recognizes two types of comparative behavior: catalactic and biological. Catalactic competition is the non-zero sum game of free trade where there are no real losers, only varying degree of success. In contrast, biological competition is the fang and claw, winner takes all kind of competition observed in nature. Catalactic competition refers to the process of rivalry among participants in a market economy, originating from the Greek word katallaten, meaning to exchange or to admit into the community. It's popularized by Austrian school economists like Ludwig von Mises. This form of competition is characterized consensual exchanges, and the coordination of individual interests through a free market price mechanism. Yeah. I think all of us here are aware of Austrian economics to the best of my understanding. So I won't go too much into what that is. But I think just one point that I think I can share is that there is free market for everything in the economy right now, and this is a bold claim, except for money. It's like you can open a restaurant. There are some licensing costs, and there are uh, policies like minimum wage laws, and there are multiple welfare schemes. So of course, my statement is a blanket statement. The free market principles are not applying to anything else. But the most glaring free market problem, or the biggest impediment, is just fiat currency, because Bitcoin is already serving its purpose as a monetary exchange. You can send Bitcoin to anybody, you can store it very easily. But because it's not being allowed, it's being made difficult for individuals to use it as money. It's becoming challenging for it to compete with other fiat currencies and truly reflect its value as money. But I think everything else, this is perhaps one of the reasons that why we live in a clown world, is that most people don't see it that way. Most people don't realize that we are living in a world where there is no free market, because they believe that who's stopping you from starting a restaurant? Or so just a very basic layman friendly example that a lot of people when I try to communicate the idea that living in a slavery, or if that's too strong a word, at least not in a free market. Most people sometimes miss the point of understanding that even something like Zomato and Swiggy are not free market activities, because they are loss-making companies, and the only reason they are able to sustain themselves is because they have relationships with the cantilenaires. So they are only able to sustain because cantilenaires exist, and cantilenaires exist only because we are not living in a free market economy. Continue reading. In catalactic competition, businesses, consumers, and other market participants compete to achieve their objectives, such as profit maximization for companies and utility maximization for consumers. Prices, which are determined by supply and demand, mediate this competition, guiding resources towards their most valued uses. The free market process is decentralized and information driven, relying on the spontaneous order that emerges from countless individual decisions rather than centralized planning. It's a positive sum game where participants benefit from consensual exchanges. Right. I hope that was self-explanatory. I think the key words here is that the free market process is decentralized and information-driven. So Hayek's quote is that money is the greatest knowledge distribution system. This was his definition of money, at least one of his definitions of money. And I think why that is especially very insightful is because he made this statement, or he made his whole body of work in times where Bitcoin was nowhere to be seen. We never have had a money which is information-driven and decentralized. Because I say this because I never think that gold has ever been successful as being money, because in any sophisticated society it can never be used as medium of exchange, because it's just too heavy for people to transact on a very human level. So it will always end up being at some bank, and you will receive a receipt to monetize it. What Bitcoin does is not making that important anymore, because you can use Bitcoin to send to anybody anywhere. So there are some technical challenges scaling Bitcoin as medium of exchange for sure, but Bitcoin at least opens up the opportunity for us to have an information driven and decentralized money. So the free market process is information driven. It is the greatest knowledge distribution system, which helps individuals lean into what they most value, whether that means production or consumption. And this is the promise of the free market that every Bitcoiner is most excited about. Conversely, biological competition is a fundamental ecological interaction in which organisms contend for the same limited resources within an environment, such as food, space, or mates. To emphasize, these resources are finite, leading to conflicts where one competitor's success inevitably comes at the expense of another. Yeah, so this is the dog eat dog world, the metaphor that people use, that any observation that you make of the wild, there is generally, so, and this might be wrong, I'll give the counter argument as well, that any apex predator is able to be the apex predator not because they're cooperating with other species, but because they are using their resources by violence or by force. So, and the corollary to that, or the counter argument, is that there is an equilibrium here. The lions will not eat all the deer in the forest, because that will only be disincentivizing lions in future to be poorer, because they will not be able to eat deer in the future. So the wild also has its own equilibrium. So no species has ever been able to dominate the wild entirely or just cover entire space. they're all competing for food, space, and mates, but no species has been able to entirely have all the food or entirely have all the space or all the mates, because there is an equilibrium at which the wild exists as well. But I think this is just that point that some people also subscribe to. I don't know what the philosophy is, the philosophy of violence, that they say that this is just how the world works, that the big fish eat the smaller fish, which I think is lazy thinking. It's not incorrect. There are, of course, elements to human cooperation and human society which include violence, but it's lazy thinking to just say that big fish eat small fish and that's just how the world is. This process results in natural selection and evolution, as individuals or species more effective at securing resources are more likely to survive and reproduce. While the distinctions between catalactics and biology is helpful for rational thought processes and deductive reasoning, purely biological or purely catalactic interactions in human societies are rare, to say the least. In the so-called free market economies of the world, inflation, taxes, and market interventions are everywhere. Most, if not all, of these phenomena are not entirely consensual, and thus not purely catalactic. If you don't pay your taxes, men with guns will eventually knock on your door, remove your freedoms by force. Such an action is a display of biological competition, not catalactics. I think this is the point that Delson was alluding to as well. And I also said briefly that human economy and human societies are not purely catalactic based. It's not purely based on cooperation. It's of course, not also purely biological based. But the only, I think people understand on a very primal level whenever there is biological competition. But on the economic layer, people don't think about taxes and inflation and market interventions as violence or as biological competition. Just as biological competition can be observed within praxeology, market-like catalactic competition appears in nature too. Fang and claw is by no means the only method of resolving conflict over scarce resources available to animals and plants. A single ant cannot survive for very long without the intricacies of the barter economy of the anthill. Ants trade pheromones, sticks, mud, and other resources without which their foresty fortresses and clay castles couldn't exist. So it's not just humans that engage in trade and economy. We study human action in economics, but every living species at some level is engaging in free market catalactic competition and free market economy as well. This is like a good example of that. Another example is the symbiotic relationship between bees and flowers. Flowers provide nectar to bees, while bees facilitate pollination for flowers. Despite the potential of either party to cheat, bees could take nectar without pollinating, or flowers could offer no nectar. The mutually beneficial strategy of cooperation prevails. So, what can game theory tell us about how collaboration and catalactics first emerged in nature? Let's find out, shall we? Yeah. So yeah, I think this is where we start Prisoner's Dilemma. That so there is clearly a combination of collaboration and catalactics. So humans are living in a world where there is violence, and humans are also living in a world where we are better off not being violent. So this is collaboration and galactic or catalactics. And game theory gives us a framework to understand that. And one illustration of that is the Prisoner's Dilemma. We'll take one pause here. Okay, let's go on. Let's start studying the Prisoner's Dilemma. The prisoner's dilemma is a specific scenario in game theory that illustrates why two rational individuals might not cooperate, even if it appears that it is in their best interest to do so. Imagine two prisoners are suspected of committing a crime jointly, but interrogated separately. Each prisoner is given the choice to betray the other by testifying against them, which is to defect, or to band together by remaining silent, cooperate. Their prison sentences will be based on how they choose to act. If both defect, they receive moderate sentences. But if one defects and the other remains silent, the betrayer is freed, while the silent one receives a harsh sentence. If both remain silent, they get minor sentences. This simple dilemma sets out the conflict between individual self-interest and mutual benefit, often leading to suboptimal outcomes for both parties. So at this point, I'll just quickly show this piece. Yeah, I hope this is visible. I think it is. So yeah, this is the graph version of the rules that, so this puts numbers into our heads. So Alice and Bill are two people who are caught by the authorities, and they are suspecting of a crime. They are suspected of a crime. So they already it's like the minimum they have to go is 2 years. It's like that's already sure. That's you have both committed a crime. Now you're going to go for 2 years. Now, but because there is a bigger crime that's been committed by you jointly, then we'll let you have a incentive to cheat on the other or create an incentive for you to give us more information. So the scenario that they create is that if one confesses and the other doesn't, then the one who is confessing, who is giving more information to the authorities, will get benefit, is incentivized to do that by giving him only 1 year of punishment, and the other person gets 10 years. The scenario is symmetric for the other person, that if they are confessing and the other person denies, then they get 1 year of punishment, only 1 year of punishment, reduced punishment, and the other person has to go to 10 years or more harsher sentence. If both decide to confess that yes, both of us have committed the crime, then you get bigger sentence because you have committed the crime and you are confessing to it. But the better of strategy is that you only get to 3 years. Nobody gets a harsh sentence of 10 years. So this is like the grid version of that. Now I'll try to do a better job of explaining the grid. So this is Bill and Alice's choices. Bill can either confess or deny. Alice can confess or deny. If both of them confess, they both have 3 years of prison time. If only Bill confesses, yeah, this is Bill's confession, but Alice denies, then Alice has to suffer or go through prison for 10 years. Bill only has to go for 1 year because Bill confessed, because Bill gave more information to the police. And in the other scenario, when Bill denies, then and Alice has confessed on Bill, then Alice gets the benefit. She gets to only get to go to prison for 1 year, and Bill has to go for 10 years. If both of them deny that both of us have not committed the crime, then they only have to go to prison for 2 years each. So their optimal strategy, if they are friends or if they are people who believe in cooperation fundamentally, will be to deny. If both of them deny that both of us have not committed the crime, they are counting on each other, right? That the other person is also denying. So this they are cooperating, and this is like the most optimal strategy. So they only have to go to prison for 2 years. But now if we, so I hope this is clear until now. In case it is not, please feel free to ask any questions. And now we'll look at this scenario from, so this was like the high level or bird's eye view of the scenario. But if we look at from Alice's perspective, now this is the tricky part, or this is the interesting part. This is where the dilemma comes. That just look at from Alice's perspective as an individual. If you are put in Alice's shoes, we'll come to Bill's shoes as well. So Alice Alice has a choice to make. She has to either confess or deny. She doesn't know anything about Bill. This is like the assumption, because we don't know anything about Bill. Alice doesn't know anything about Bill, whether Bill chooses or confesses or denies. Then if Bill, there are two scenarios that Bill confesses. So if Bill confesses, Alice either has to go to prison for 3 years or 10 years. When she confesses, she goes to 3 years. She goes to prison for 3 years. When she denies, she goes to prison for 10 years. So clearly, when Bill is confessing, Alice is incentivized to confess, because 3 is better than 10 in terms of prison time. So Alice is incentivized to confess. Now let's take the scenario of Bill denying. If Bill is denying, then Alice either goes to prison for 1 year, or she goes to 2 years. Give me a few seconds. Yeah. If Bill is denying, then Alice either confesses or denies. If she confesses, she goes for 1 year. And if she denies, then she goes for 2 years. So 1 is less than 2. She is incentivized to confess again, even if Bill is denying, because she's only having to go to prison for 1 year. So in both cases, you can see that Alice is incentivized to confess because she gets lesser prison time. The only advantage of her ever denying is to take the risk that Bill also denies. This is the only advantage she ever has of denying the crime. She's counting on Bill to also deny. This is the risk that she's taking. The risk will be worth it if she does it, but the cost of she will receive a much harsher sentences if Bill doesn't come through. And this is symmetric for Bill. So I won't walk over each step of Bill again, but this is literally the same scenario for Bill as well, if you look at from his lens. And one just point that I think I'll just open as a question for this group as well. I think it was actually not a good idea to take number 10 here, because this, I think, this introduces more factors here than we would have ideally wanted. Because this number, if this was 4, it's like minimum base case scenario is that any of them have to go to prison at least for 1 year. That's like the base case scenario. There's no situation where you're not going to jail at all. and the worst case scenario currently is 10, and the only risk why will they ever risk even having a shot at going to 10 years? Only when they are incentivized to cooperate, only when they can count on the other person to cooperate. So I think this is my personal opinion that it actually is not a good example to take 10. It should have been more like 4, because the benefit with 4 otherwise would have been that the base case scenario is 2, the worst case scenario is 3 in case of denial, and in case of confession, the best case scenario is 1, the worst case scenario is 3. So higher risk with 4, but there is a better case scenario as well with 2. And in this case, the best case scenario will be 1, but the worst case scenario is 3. So somebody will consider the risk. This is my opinion on whether the harsh sentence of 10 actually helps us illustrate the point, because the 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 differential here becomes the quantum of risk as well, in my opinion, that for somebody to even consider 10 years of jail time, it becomes a much safer choice to confess, because the worst case is that you'll go to 3 years. The benefit of denying will only be that you only have to go to prison for 2 years, but the risk is that you can also perhaps go for 10 years because you don't know anything about the other person. But yeah, this is the prisoner's dilemma, and this is why the individual is always incentivized to confess, and both of them, when they end up doing that, have to go to prison for 3 years, even though both of them were incentivized to actually cooperate and go to jail for 2 years. They end up with a suboptimal result, and the only reason they do that is because cooperation is something that they don't really have any information on. So the core assumption in prisoner's dilemma is that they don't know anything about each other. And also, just again, one extra point, that if we were to assume that Alice and Bill know each other or they have any relationship with each other, this introduces more factors, because now this gets into the subjective territory of whether Alice and Bill are able to cooperate or trust with each other. Yeah, I'll just take one pause here. I hope that made some sense, if not entirely.
Just to add to the prisoner's dilemma, right? So this is based on two-dimensional world wherein Alice and Bill are there. So that makes the 3 and 3 as the most best case. But if we add one more layer saying the three-dimensional, let's say there's one more prisoner who is being captured, right? That 3 by 3 case actually becomes very much concrete and becomes the best case scenario.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think you'll be able to explain why that is, that in three people the best case decision becomes not cooperating?
Yeah, the probability of confession by 1 is much more greater in 3 by 3. And as we scale it up, scale the people much more higher, right? The probability of confession, even by a single person, is much more higher. In here, it is probably 50-50%, but as we proceed further and further, the confession is, we lose the portion of trust. So two people can cooperate with each other, two people can trust each other, but when it comes to 3 or more, the cooperation dilutes as we go further and further.
Right. No, interesting. This is actually interesting, because I think the insight for me through game theory was just putting numerical numbers to it. So another scenario, and I'll just try my best to explain this. That instead of, I'm just making an attempt, that instead of prisoner's dilemma, if somebody were to invert it, that this is, instead of being punishment, there is some benefit to it. It's like, imagine that this is 3 fruits that you are. So the choice would be that if both of them cooperate, then they both. No, I actually try to sit with myself more on this. But I think the point or insight that I had was that when you are cooperating, you are taking the risk of cooperation, and the risk reward ratio tells you that you are incentivized to cooperate, but the risk is that you are cooperating. But when you're not cooperating, you have more rational decision making, because you are not needing to cooperate, or you're choosing to not cooperate, but the result becomes suboptimal. And whether that's good or bad, I think it's an entirely different debate, because that depends on situations and personal preferences. But I think this was the insight, that humans are always better off cooperating. But I think what Bitcoin represents is the need to not cooperate. It's the need that every node speaks for himself and can verify the rules entirely. But I think, yeah, I think this is on a very human level. I always heard that whenever 3 people come in, all of them have each other as more.
dimensions of the character, or if you increase the players in a game, obviously based on those types which I said, right? Cooperative, non-cooperative, all those things, they actually play their own role, and each character will have its own type. Like one might be a cooperative one, but he might have asymmetric gains that needs to be done. So it's based on those choices, those permutations, which actually makes those theorems a little complex. So we can't put a mathematical formula to it, but it's more of psychology, and Austrian economics kind of similarly says those things in a very fluid terms.
Right, right. No, that's very well put. Yeah, I think we can still put probabilities to it, right? I think we can't, of course, mathematically study it because you can't put any number to human behaviors. Like, it's uncertain fundamentally, but you can put probabilities. I believe you can, at least in terms of when there are limited choices.
Yes, you can put that.
Yeah, I think I'll need to go deeper into game theory to have more insights on it.
Okay. Yeah, you can put the numbers on the strategies actually.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, different strategies.
Right. Yep. Let's actually, I don't know if there's any, I know about games in person, but I don't know if any online game allows us to study strategy. I'm always curious to go into that. But yeah, I'll continue reading. Thanks for sharing insights, Ravi, as well. For example, Craig is a snake oil salesman, and his uncle Calvin sometimes helps him scam people. One day, Agent Three Letter arrests them and starts interrogating the duo. Okay, so Craig is a scammer. His uncle is helping him scam. Now, some three-letter agency has arrested them, and they are interrogating the uncle and the scammer. So the three-letter agent knows he hasn't enough evidence to convict Craig and Calvin for a pyramid scheme unless one turns on the other. Therefore, he decides to separate the two and offers each the same deal. If one rats out the other, the rat will be freed immediately, while the other faces 20 years of soap picking in the showers of San Quentin. If they both blame each other, they will both receive a rather lengthy 10 years in the slammer. However, if they refrain from playing the blame game altogether, Craig and Calvin will be charged with a minor offense and receive a paltry 5 years in a nice Norwegian daycare center. So it's like asking scammers to not scam each other. If they are able to somehow trust each other, even though they're scamming the world, they will be having a much paltry and much minor penalty. In other scenarios, if both of them are, of course, ratting each other out, they face a lot of punishment. And if one rats out and the other is not, then also it's considerably large, 10 years. Faced with these options, Craig and Calvin must decide independently whether to betray the other or remain silent, each without knowing what the other person will choose. Right, so they are choosing independently, and they don't have any information about each other. In this particular case, though, the perpetrators both died from AIDS before the trial had even begun, and Agent Three Letter retired early to play balloons every day for the rest of his life. Okay, at this point, I had not read this part of the book, so I'm not sure if this is sarcasm or actual content. We'll continue and we'll learn.
And one more trivia. Okay, so the father of John D. Rockefeller was actually a snake oil salesman. It's
interesting. Yeah, as in a literal salesman of snake oil.
Yeah, literal snake oil salesman.
Is that where the metaphor has originated from?
Probably. So he amassed wealth. I mean, he did not actually amass wealth, but his strategy is to do some crazy business. He will stay in his home only very few time of the year, and he's not at all there for his growth. Actually, he'll just go travel, something like that. Okay. And because he keeps changing the cities because his scams will get revealed.
Okay. I had one personal opinion question for you, Delson. If you'd like to share that, you're completely okay to not share it.
Okay.
But do you think that hyper-Bitcoinization can ever become a reality? Because I think you also talked about how we are assuming that everybody acts in their self-interest. So Bitcoin does assume that free market eventually wins. Maybe I am wrong, but this is my assumption that Bitcoin does assume that every individual is incentivized to hold Bitcoin because it is adding value to their life. Would love to hear your take.
No, I don't think that it assumes. The thing is that it's just making life difficult for the central bankers, like the enemies. Let's say that our enemies.
Right. Fair. True.
That's my opinion. See, hyper Bitcoinization, whether it happened or whether it doesn't happen, no, Bitcoin is certainly making life difficult for them. Even the internet is making life difficult for them. I shared a video of who some Rothschild in England. Okay, so Rothschild, I mean, if you're talking about Bitcoin, it's more important to talk about who the actual central bankers were than to talk about Friedman or anyone, at least in my opinion. Okay, here, because people you're talking about like capitalism and all this stuff, but actually reading about some history will give more insight. I mean, why I'm talking about is I shared this video where he said that internet is the biggest obstacle to science and progress. That is the only time he spoke in the parliament ever. The second time, he has spoke once before. The first time he spoke is he wants to promote pasteurized milk. Okay. And the second time he spoke is he wants to speak against internet. So they are actually like scared of the technological progress. But yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think internet is the free market for communication. So that's also why they were scared of it.
See, it's not about free market. It's about they are losing control.
Right.
Free market, see, it's just like hypothetical. Like, I mean, even in the Bitcoin world, people will commit crimes. Okay, there will be some. I mean, momentarily there will be some group of people who took control of a particular province or state or whatever, and they can do some crazy stuff. But the idea is that in the long run, kind of, we will find the good equilibrium.
Right. I think the way I see it is that Bitcoin makes war infeasible. It does not do away with crime. It makes war expensive. So how I think it solves the problem with war, not with crime, because war is only able to sustain at the scale that it does because somebody is able to print money. Because nobody is ever subsidizing the costs of war voluntarily.
Yeah, no, but not that happen. Bitcoin needs to get adopted.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of monetary reality, Bitcoin is still an experiment, right? I mean, 15 years could hardly ever justify any money.
Yeah, I mean, it will gain adoption. Like, I think for the next price jump, it will gain more adoption, but we don't know when that is going to happen. Anyway.
Yeah. Yep. So I'll just read one paragraph. I think this introduction of tit for tat as another example of prisoner's dilemma, and then we'll close off this session. With its option to cooperate or defect, the prisoner's dilemma mirrors real-world conflicts and natural phenomena, illustrating how repeated interactions impact strategic choices. The 1980 computer tournament organized by political scientist Robert Axelrod brought new insights into the dilemma by letting players play it repeatedly, using various strategies. As it turns out, when the game is played in perpetuity for some unknown number of times, the winning tactic is a strategy called tit for tat. I'll actually let this session end here. I think Aaron also shared a simulation of some strategy games. So I watched one other video on how tit for tat is actually one of the most recommended strategies for anything. And it makes sense on a very human level. It's like if you're good to me, I'm good to you. If you're not, then I'm not. So that's like the tit for tat strategy philosophy. But yeah, we'll continue with this session next time. Yep, thank you for joining, guys. If there are any closing comments and thoughts, we'll take them. Also, I think I'll yeah, Ravi, go ahead.
Thanks, Sharon. I think it was a nice session. A lot of brainstorm to do. Quite intrigued by the game theory and probably will research a little bit more on that.
Right, yeah.